In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where civilizations rise and fall like waves against cosmic shores, there exists a fundamental truth that every species learns: never underestimate the quiet ones. For 3,000 years, the Galactic Council had maintained order through careful diplomacy, strategic alliances, and, when necessary, controlled warfare. They had faced the crystal-singing Vorthak, survived the hive-mind assault of the Zephyrians, and even negotiated peace with the reality-bending Nexari. But nothing, absolutely nothing, had prepared them for humanity. When the small blue planet called Earth first appeared on their sensors, the Council barely gave it a second glance. Another primitive world, they thought. Another species just discovering fire, perhaps inventing the wheel. The automated survey marked it as developing civilization and filed it away with thousands of others. That was their first mistake. Now, as the greatest war in galactic history tears through star systems and threatens to consume everything in its path, the Council faces an impossible choice. They could invite Earth to join the conflict. After all, every civilization had a duty to defend galactic peace. They could conscript them as they had done with countless other worlds. But they won't. Because somewhere in the deepest archives of the Council, buried beneath layers of classified files and forgotten by all but the most paranoid intelligence officers, lies a single report. A report that speaks of a species so terrifyingly adaptable, so impossibly resilient, and so fundamentally unpredictable that even their own home planet seems to actively try to kill them and fails. The report that recommends, in the strongest possible terms, that humanity should never, under any circumstances, be allowed to leave their solar system. The report that the Council ignored. Until now. Ambassador Zexhai pressed her 4 hands against the cool metal of her desk, trying to steady the tremor that had been running through her crystalline form for the past 3 rotations. The emergency session of the Galactic Council was about to convene, and she was the bearer of news that would shake the very foundations of their civilization. The holographic display before her showed a simple star chart, focusing on an unremarkable yellow star in what the locals called the Milky Way's Orion Armsole, they called it. Such a plain name for something that was about to change everything. Council Session 7794 is now in session, announced the artificial intelligence that governed the massive station orbiting the galactic core. All members present or represented. Around the circular chamber, representatives from over 200 species materialized through quantum entanglement communicators. The Vorthak appeared as shifting geometric patterns of pure sound, their crystalline bodies singing in harmonious frequencies. The Nexari flickered in and out of visible dimensions, their forms never quite stable in normal spacetime. Even the ancient keepers, being so old they remembered the galaxy's first civilizations, had sent a representative, a rare honor that spoke to the gravity of the situation. Zexhai stood slowly, her translator implant adjusting to broadcast in the 17 most common galactic languages simultaneously. Honored colleagues, I bring urgent news from Sector 7 Alpha, regarding the developing situation in what we designate as System Sol 3. A ripple of confusion passed through the chamber. System Sol 3 was barely a footnote in galactic records, a small yellow star with several planets, one of which showed signs of primitive life. It had been marked for potential future contact in approximately 500 rotations, when the dominant species might develop basic spaceflight. I'm afraid I don't understand the urgency, spoke Overlord Thrax of the Hegemony, his insectoid features clicking with annoyance. That system contains nothing but a pre-contact civilization. Surely this could wait for the regular quarterly reports? Zexhai's form flickered with nervous energy, causing light to refract through her crystal body in sharp, agitated patterns. I'm afraid not, Overlord. 3 rotations ago, we received a Priority 1 alert from our deep space monitoring station in that sector. The primitive civilization has achieved faster than light travel. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the Vorthak's constant harmonic humming ceased momentarily. Impossible, declared High Researcher Veltan of the Academic Collective, her massive brain case pulsing with computational activity. Our projections showed they were at least 5 centuries from such capability. They've barely mastered combustion engines according to our last survey. That survey was conducted 50 of their years ago, Zexhai replied, her voice tight with barely controlled panic. And, I'm afraid the situation is far worse than early FTL development. They've not just achieved it, they've perfected it. Their drive technology is unlike anything we've seen before. The holographic display shifted, showing sensor readings that made several council members recoil in shock. The energy signatures were impossible, clean, efficient, and generating power levels that should have required matter-antimatter annihilation or zero-point field manipulation. "By the void," whispered Sage Morthek of the Eternal Circle. "Those readings, they're using controlled black hole manipulation for propulsion. How is that possible from a species that hasn't even unified their own planet?" Before Zexai could answer, another voice cut through the chamber, cold, mechanical, and filled with an ancient authority that commanded immediate attention. "Because," spoke the Keeper's representative, its voice resonating directly into each being's consciousness, "they are the ones from the Forbidden Archives." The chamber erupted into chaos. The Forbidden Archives were legend, myth, the stuff of paranoid conspiracy theories whispered in the darkest corners of the galaxy. They supposedly contained records of civilizations too dangerous to contact, species so fundamentally threatening to galactic stability that all contact was permanently prohibited. "The archives are sealed for good reason," the Keeper continued, its form becoming more solid as it focused its attention on the assembly. 3,000 cycles ago, our predecessors encountered a species that defied every law of evolution, every principle of civilized development. A species that thrived in conditions that would kill most galactic races within moments. A species that seemed to view violence not as a last resort, but as entertainment. Zexai felt her crystalline form begin to crack under the stress. She had hoped the council would react with their usual measured deliberation, perhaps forming a committee to study the situation. Instead, she was witnessing the first public acknowledgement of the galaxy's greatest secret. The archives speak of a world where the very air was poison to most life forms, where the surface was bombarded by deadly radiation, where massive storms could level continents and the ground itself could open up and swallow cities whole. The Keeper's voice grew darker with each word. "And this species, they called it home. They thrived there. They made it their paradise." High researcher Veltan's braincase was now pulsing so rapidly that several other council members had to shield their optical sensors. "You're describing the mythical Death World classification. No such planet has ever been confirmed to exist." "Because we made sure of it," the Keeper replied. "Every record was sealed, every survey destroyed, every mention classified beyond the highest levels. We told ourselves it was for the greater good, that some knowledge was too dangerous to preserve." "But we did preserve it," another voice interrupted. Admiral Korthak of the military coalition materialized fully in the chamber, his reptilian features grim with understanding. "Deep in the archives, hidden behind psychic barriers and quantum encryption. We preserved it because some threats are too great to forget completely." The Admiral activated his personal display, and, suddenly, the chamber was filled with images that defied comprehension. Creatures barely 2 meters tall, walking upright on just 2 limbs, with sparse body hair and soft-looking skin. They looked fragile, almost pathetic compared to the mighty forms of the galactic races. "These beings," Admiral Korthak continued, "survived an ice age that should have frozen their entire world solid. They survived supervolcanic eruptions that blotted out their sun for years. They survived asteroid impacts, global pandemics, and magnetic pole reversals. And, not just survived, they grew stronger." The images shifted, showing increasingly disturbing scenes. The fragile-looking beings were fighting massive predators with nothing but crude weapons. They were climbing impossible heights just to see what was there. They were diving into crushing ocean depths for no apparent reason other than curiosity. They domesticated wolves, the Admiral's voice was barely above a whisper. "Wolves. Apex predators. They turned them into pets and called them dogs. They conquered the sky not through natural evolution but by strapping themselves to controlled explosions. They split the atom and, instead of using it purely for power, they made weapons so terrible that they frightened themselves into not using them." Councillor Vexera of the Diplomatic Corps, whose species was renowned for their ability to find peaceful solutions to any conflict, was visibly shaking. "Surely you're exaggerating. No species could be so fundamentally violent." "Violent?" The Keeper's laugh was like the sound of dying stars. "You think they're violent? Violence is what the Zephyrian hive mind practices. Violence is what the Crystal Dominion wielded during the Resonance Wars. What humans practice is something far more terrifying, they call it warfare. The display changed again, showing tactical readouts that made the assembled military leaders recoil in horror. Battle formations that defied logic, strategies that seemed designed to cause maximum psychological impact, weapons that were created not just to kill, but to terrorize. They have a saying, the Keeper continued. If you want peace, prepare for war. But that's not the worst part. The worst part is that they've turned war into an art form. They study it, they practice it, they improve it constantly. And, when they're not fighting others, they fight each other not from hatred, but from boredom. No, breathed Overlord Thrax, his compound eyes reflecting the horror on the display. No species could be so systemically destructive. They had a war that lasted 100 of their years, Admiral Korthak read from his files. 100 years. Over religion. Then, they had another one that consumed their entire world for 6 years and killed over 50 million of their own kind. And, when it ended, they didn't learn to stop fighting, they learned to fight better. Sage Morthak's ancient voice cracked with disbelief. But, surely, as they developed space travel, as they gained perspective on their place in the universe, they immediately began planning how to fight in space, Zexhai interrupted, her voice hollow with despair. Our monitors have detected weapon systems on their spacecraft that violate 17 different galactic warfare conventions. And, these aren't even military vessels, they're exploration ships. The chamber fell into stunned silence. The implications were staggering. A species that treated warfare as a natural extension of curiosity, that viewed deadly environments as challenges to overcome rather than threats to avoid, that could turn any tool into a weapon and any exploration into conquest. How many of them are there? Whispered High Researcher Veltan. Nearly 8 billion on their home world, Zexhai replied. And, their population growth is accelerating, not slowing, as they develop better technology. 8 billion, Counselor Vexera repeated the number like a death sentence. 8 billion members of a warrior species with faster-than-light travel. It gets worse, Admiral Korthak said, his scaled hands trembling as he accessed deeper files. They've been monitoring our communications. They know we exist. And, according to our deep space assets, they're already building what they call colony ships. The Keeper's representative became fully solid for the first time in millennia, its ancient form radiating an aura of absolute terror. Then, it has begun. The scenario our predecessors feared above all others. They're coming. How long do we have? Asked Overlord Thrax. Zexhai looked around the chamber, meeting the optical sensors and eyes of the galaxy's most powerful beings. Their lead scout ship will reach the edge of Council space in 14 rotations. Maybe 15 if they stop to investigate every system along the way, which, knowing humans, they absolutely will. And, their military capabilities? Unknown, Admiral Korthak admitted. But, if their exploration vessels mount weapon systems that could challenge our dreadnoughts, I don't want to imagine what their actual warships look like. The silence stretched for long moments before the Keeper spoke again. There is one option. One solution our predecessors considered but never implemented. Every being in the chamber focused on the ancient entity. We could surrender. The suggestion hit the chamber like a physical blow. The Galactic Council, masters of 1,000 worlds, arbiters of cosmic law, guardians of civilized space, surrendered to a species they'd never even officially contacted. You can't be serious, Overlord Thrax stammered. Deadly serious, the Keeper replied. Because the alternative is a war we cannot win. A war against a species that doesn't just fight to victory, they fight until there's nothing left to fight. And, then, they fight each other for practice. As the reality of their situation sank in, one thought echoed through every mind in the chamber: how do you negotiate with a species that views the impossible as a personal challenge and considers warfare a form of entertainment? The answer, they were beginning to realize, was that you didn't. You prayed they never noticed you in the first place. But, it was too late for prayers now. The emergency session had been suspended for 3 full rotations while council members consulted with their respective governments. When they reconvened, the atmosphere in the chamber was heavy with dread and desperate determination. Several species had sent additional representatives, military advisors, strategic analysts, and, in some cases, what could only be described as contingency evacuation coordinators. Zexai noticed that the Keeper's representative had remained fully materialized since their last meeting, something that hadn't happened in recorded history. The ancient being's presence had drawn other Keepers from across the galaxy, their collective knowledge focused on one terrible question: how do you contain humanity without triggering the very conflict you're trying to avoid? The situation has deteriorated, announced Admiral Korthak as he activated the primary display. The star chart now showed an expanding sphere of influence around the Sol system, marked with the ominous red indicators of human presence. Our deep space monitoring stations have detected 17 separate human vessels moving through hyperspace at velocities that should be theoretically impossible. High researcher Veltan's braincase pulsed with frantic calculations. 17 ships in 3 rotations? Their manufacturing capabilities must be extraordinary. How large are these vessels? That's problematic to answer, Admiral Korthak replied, his scale features showing deep concern. The largest appears to be approximately 2 kilometers in length, but our sensors can't penetrate their hull composition. What we can determine is that each ship is broadcasting different energy signatures, suggesting they're not just mass-produced copies, each one is unique. Unique how? Pressed Counselor Vexera. Unique as in each ship appears to be designed for a different purpose, Admiral Korthak explained. We've identified what we believe to be exploration vessels, research platforms, and what can only be described as mobile manufacturing facilities. But the concerning part is that every single one also carries military-grade weapons systems as standard equipment. Overlord Thrax clicked his mandibles nervously. So even their civilian vessels are militarized? It appears to be instinctive with them, the Keeper interjected, its ancient voice carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. The archived records indicate that humans have never built anything, not tools, not vehicles, not even toys for their young, without considering how it might be used as a weapon. The chamber erupted in confused murmurs. The concept was so alien to most galactic species that several translators malfunctioned trying to process the implications. Perhaps we should consider formal contact, suggested Sage Morthek. If we approach them with diplomatic intentions, establish trade relationships, cultural exchange. Absolutely not, the Keeper's voice cut through the suggestion like a blade. You don't understand what you're dealing with. Humans don't see diplomacy and warfare as opposites, they see them as different tools for the same purpose. They have expressions like war by other means and speak softly and carry a big stick. To them, negotiation is just warfare conducted through conversation. But surely they must have peaceful elements in their society, Counselor Vexera insisted. Every species has those who prefer harmony to conflict. They do, admitted Admiral Korthak, consulting his files. They call them pacifists. And do you know what humans do when pacifists are threatened? They become the most vicious warriors of all, because they believe they're fighting for peace itself. The display shifted to show intercepted human communications, translated through the most sophisticated linguistic algorithms in the galaxy. The messages were routine, mundane conversations between ship crews, but the casual references to violence were chilling. Listen to this, Admiral Korthak played back an audio file. Captain, we're approaching the Proxima system. Should we launch the standard exploration package? Affirmative, but keep the kinetic bombardment systems on standby. You never know what we might find out here. Kinetic bombardment systems, High Researcher Veltan repeated slowly. On an exploration vessel. It gets worse, Admiral Korthak continued. Here's a conversation between 2 research teams. Did you finish the geological survey of that asteroid? Yeah, but we also mapped out optimal placement for mining charges. Figured while we were there, we might as well think about how to blow it up if we needed to. The casual nature of the violence references sent shivers through the assembled representatives. These weren't military communications, these were routine work discussions. Humans appeared to plan for destruction as automatically as other species planned for construction. There's something else, Zexai spoke up, her crystalline form flickering with agitation. Our xenobiological analysts have been studying the few biological samples we've managed to obtain through remote sensing. The human's physical capabilities are unsettling. How so? Asked Overlord Thrax. They're persistence hunters, she explained. Their entire physiology is designed around the ability to chase prey until it dies of exhaustion. They can run for days without stopping. Their healing capabilities are extraordinary, they can survive injuries that would kill most species. And their pain tolerance. She paused, accessing her files with trembling appendages. They have sports, recreational activities that involve deliberately causing each other physical harm. They call it football and boxing and rugby. And they enjoy it. But that's impossible, protested Sage Morthek. No species evolves recreational violence. Humans did, the keeper said simply. Because for humans, violence isn't aberrant behavior, it's creative expression. They've turned warfare into poetry, combat into dance, and destruction into art. The implications hung in the air like a toxic cloud. A species that viewed violence as entertainment, that planned for destruction as casually as other races plan for lunch, that treated warfare as a natural extension of diplomacy, and they now had faster-than-light travel and were spreading across the galaxy. We need to consider worst-case scenarios, Admiral Korthak announced grimly. If we cannot contain them diplomatically, if we cannot deter them through shows of force, we may be forced to take preemptive action. You mean war, Counselor Vexera stated flatly. I mean survival, the Admiral replied. Because once they realize how many inhabited worlds exist in the galaxy, once they understand the scope of the galactic community, they won't see opportunities for trade and cultural exchange. They'll see the greatest military challenge their species has ever encountered. And they'll love it, the keeper added with horrifying certainty. High researcher Veltan's computational arrays were working at maximum capacity, running probability calculations at speeds that made the air around her shimmer with heat. I've been analyzing their expansion patterns, trying to predict their next moves. The results are troubling. Show us, Overlord Thrax demanded. The display transformed into a complex three-dimensional map of local space, showing projected human expansion routes. The patterns were unlike anything seen from other species. Instead of following logical paths toward resource-rich systems or strategically important positions, the human routes seemed almost random. They're not expanding toward valuable resources, High Researcher Veltan explained. They're expanding toward interesting challenges. Look at this trajectory, they're heading directly toward the Maelstrom Nebula, an area so dangerous that we've marked it as completely off-limits for the past 1,000 years. Why would they do that? Asked Sage Morthek. Because it's dangerous, Admiral Korthak answered. They see danger as an invitation. Our archives contain records of humans climbing mountains for no reason other than they were tall, diving into ocean trenches because they were deep, and venturing into Arctic wastelands because they were cold. They don't avoid challenges, they seek them out. But that means... Counselor Vexera's voice trailed off as she realized the implications. That means they're going to find the Void Singers, the keeper finished for her. The chamber fell into absolute silence. The Void Singers were the galaxy's most carefully guarded secret, a species so violent and destructive that they had been quarantined in the Maelstrom Nebula for over 2 millennia. They were the reason the nebula was forbidden, not because of natural dangers, but because of what lived inside it. If humans make contact with the Void Singers, Admiral Korthak began. They won't just make contact, the keeper interrupted. They'll probably try to domesticate them. Or worse, they'll learn from them. The thought was too terrible to contemplate. The Void Singers were pure aggression given form, beings that existed only to destroy and consume. If humans encountered them and somehow survived, we have to stop them, Overlord Thrax declared. Whatever the cost, we cannot allow humans to reach the Maelstrom Nebula. How? Demanded High Researcher Veltan. We've run simulations. Our combined fleets couldn't stop 17 human exploration vessels, let alone their entire expansion. There is one option, the keeper said slowly, as if the words were being dragged from its ancient consciousness. The Omega Protocol. Every representative in the chamber recoiled as if struck. The Omega Protocol was theoretical, a last resort so extreme that it had never been seriously considered. It involved the complete sterilization of a star system using weaponry that violated every galactic treaty and moral principle. You can't be serious, whispered Counselor Vexera. The destruction of an entire solar system? Including Earth itself? 8 billion lives, added Sage Morthek. Genocide on an unimaginable scale. Against the potential destruction of the entire galaxy, the Keeper replied coldly. How many civilizations will survive if humans and Void Singers form an alliance? How many species will exist after humans decide that the galaxy needs to be improved through their particular brand of creative destruction? Admiral Korthak was running tactical analyses, his display showing calculations that made his reptilian blood run cold. Even if we could overcome the moral implications, the practical aspects are problematic. Our deep space monitoring indicates that humans have already established off-world colonies. Destroying Earth wouldn't eliminate the threat, it might just make them angry. And angry humans are exponentially more dangerous than curious ones, the Keeper agreed. No, the Omega Protocol is no longer viable. We have one option left. Which is, asked Sex High. We pray that when they encounter the Void Singers, they destroy each other, the Keeper replied. Because if they don't, if they somehow find common ground. The ancient being's form began to fade slightly, as if the very thought of what might come next was too terrible to contemplate. Then, we hope they're merciful conquerors, Admiral Korthak finished grimly. As the session continued, reports kept streaming in from across the galaxy. Human ships were accelerating their expansion, their exploration patterns becoming more aggressive and systematic. They were mapping hyperspace lanes with frightening efficiency, cataloging stellar phenomena with scientific precision, and testing their weapons systems on asteroids with casual regularity. And, somewhere in the depths of space, heading inexorably toward the Maelstrom Nebula, a human exploration vessel called the Indomitable Spirit was about to make first contact with something that would change the balance of galactic power forever. The war hadn't begun yet. But, it was coming. And, when it did, the galaxy would learn why some species should never be allowed to leave their home worlds. Captain Sarah Chen stood on the bridge of the UES Indomitable Spirit, watching the sensor readings with the kind of focused intensity that had made her the youngest exploration fleet commander in human history. At 38, she had already led 17 deep space missions, each one pushing further into the unknown reaches of the galaxy. Today's mission was no different except for the fact that they were approaching something that every piece of conventional wisdom said they should avoid. Captain, we're getting some seriously weird readings from that nebula, reported Lieutenant Commander Marcus Torres from the science station, his fingers dancing across holographic displays that showed energy patterns unlike anything in their databases. The electromagnetic interference is off the charts, gravity fluctuations that shouldn't be possible, and there's something else. Something else? Chen prompted, moving to stand behind Torres, her brown eyes studying the data streams. There are artificial structures in there. Massive ones. And, they're moving. Chen felt the familiar surge of excitement that came with discovering the impossible. It was the same feeling she'd experienced when they'd first figured out how to fold spacetime, when they'd realized that the galaxy was vast beyond imagination, when they'd understood that humanity was probably not alone in the universe. Define massive, she ordered. Think Manhattan Island, but mobile and radiating enough energy to power our entire homeworld for 1,000 years, Torres replied, his voice tight with barely controlled awe. Captain, there's an entire civilization in that nebula. Around the bridge, the crew exchanged glances of excitement mixed with apprehension. The prospect of first contact with an alien species was something every human had dreamed of since they'd first looked up at the stars. But, their mission briefings had been very clear about protocols: observe, record, report back, and, under no circumstances engage unless directly threatened. What about the interference patterns? Asked Commander Elena Vasquez, the ship's tactical officer, her augmented reality display showing weapon system readiness in the corner of her vision. Can we maintain communications through that mess? That's the strange part, Torres replied, pulling up another set of readings. The interference isn't random. It's structured, almost like it's being generated deliberately. And, Captain, I think it's trying to communicate. Chen moved to the captain's chair, settling into the worn leather that had carried her through countless light years of exploration. The Indomitable Spirit wasn't the largest ship in the human fleet, that honor went to the massive colony vessels currently terraforming worlds throughout local space, but it was fast, tough, and equipped with the most advanced sensor arrays humanity had ever built. Analysis, Torres. What kind of communication? Mathematical progressions, prime number sequences, basic geometric patterns. It's textbook first contact protocol, except. He paused, checking his readings again.
Except it's being transmitted through gravitational wave manipulation.
They're literally bending spacetime to send us messages.
The implications hit the bridge crew like a physical blow. Gravitational wave communication required technology so advanced that human scientists had only theorized about its possibility.
Any species capable of such feats was operating on a technological level that dwarfed humanity's achievements.
Recommendations?
Chen asked, though she already knew what her answer would be. Human nature demanded investigation of the unknown, especially when that unknown was trying to say hello. Standard protocol suggests we maintain our distance and report back to Earth Command, Vasquez said, though her tone suggested she found the idea as distasteful as her captain did. Wait for a proper first contact team with diplomatic credentials.
Which would take 6 months to arrive, Torres added. And, by then, who knows if the opportunity will still exist?
Chen smiled grimly. This was why she'd been chosen to command exploration vessels rather than colony ships or military cruisers. When faced with the unknown, her first instinct wasn't to retreat or call for backup, it was to discover what lay beyond the next horizon.
Signal the fleet, she ordered.
I want the Relentless and the Pathfinder to maintain position at the nebula's edge. If we don't report back in 72 hours, they are to return to Earth with full sensor logs.
And us? Asked Vasquez.
We're going to say hello, Chen replied.
Torres, can you replicate their gravitational communication method?
Give me 20 minutes to reconfigure our spacetime manipulators, he said, already deep in calculations. We won't be able to match their sophistication, but we should be able to manage basic mathematical responses. As Torres worked, Chen found herself studying the nebula through the main viewer. From this distance, it looked like any other cosmic phenomenon, a vast cloud of gas and dust, beautiful in its own way but hardly threatening. But the sensor readings told a different story.
Deep within that seemingly peaceful cloud lay structures that defied understanding and a civilization that could manipulate the fundamental forces of the universe. Captain, Torres announced, I've established a basic communication protocol. I'm sending mathematical sequences and receiving responses.
They're definitely intelligent, and they seem excited about our presence.
Excited how? Chen asked.
They're accelerating their communication rate, increasing the complexity of the mathematical problems they're sending us. It's almost like they're testing our cognitive abilities.
Chen nodded slowly. And how are we doing?
Well, we're keeping up with the basic stuff, but some of their advanced mathematics is beyond our current understanding. They just sent us what appears to be a proof for faster-than-light communication through quantum entanglement, something our physicists said was impossible.
Apparently not, Commander Vasquez observed dryly. Captain, I'm receiving a new signal, Torres reported, his excitement evident. It's not mathematical this time.
They're sending what appears to be star charts and coordinates. They want us to meet them at a specific location within the nebula. Chen felt the familiar tingle of anticipation that came with crossing a threshold from which there was no return. Every exploration mission had moments like this, points where the safe choice was to retreat and the human choice was to press forward into the unknown. Set course for their coordinates, she ordered.
Full sensor sweeps as we go. I want to know everything about what we're heading into.
As the indomitable spirit moved into the nebula, the bridge crew watched in awe as the universe transformed around them. The electromagnetic interference created a light show that painted the void in colors that had no names, while gravitational fluctuations made space itself seem to ripple like water.
Sensors are picking up multiple artificial structures, Torres reported. Captain, there are hundreds of them. Ships, stations, structures that don't fit any category in our databases. And they're all heading toward our rendezvous point. Fleet composition, asked Vasquez, her tactical instincts automatically categorizing potential threats. That's just it, I can't tell what's a ship and what's a station.
Some of these things are the size of small moons, but they're moving like fighters. Others are barely larger than our shuttles but radiating enough energy to vaporize an asteroid.
Chen studied the sensor displays, noting the organized way the alien structures were positioning themselves. It wasn't random movement, it was a formation, though unlike any formation in human military doctrine.
Are they surrounding us? She asked. Not exactly, Torres replied after a moment of analysis.
It's more like they're forming an honor guard. Like they want to escort us to something important.
As they approached the coordinates, the scope of what they were seeing became clear. At the heart of the nebula sat a structure so massive that calling it a ship seemed inadequate. It stretched for dozens of kilometers in every direction, its surface covered with what appeared to be cities, industrial complexes, and weapon systems that could level planets.
My God, whispered Vasquez. It's not just a ship, it's a mobile world.
And it's powering up to communicate with us, Torres added.
Captain, I'm receiving a transmission.
It's coming through our own communication systems somehow. They've figured out our technology just by observing us.
Put it through, Chen ordered.
The bridge filled with a voice that seemed to resonate from everywhere at once, deep, powerful, and carrying harmonics that spoke of vast intelligence and barely contained violence. Welcome, small warriors from the young star, the voice said in perfect English, though something in its tone suggested that language was merely a convenient tool for communication. I am Warsinger Theshkar of the Void Singers, and you have entered our domain at a most fortuitous time.
Chen exchanged glances with her senior staff.
The voice was speaking English, but, more than that, it seemed to understand human concepts of courtesy and respect. I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Indomitable Spirit, she replied, activating the ship's communication systems. We come in peace, seeking knowledge and understanding. Peace, the voice repeated, and Chen could swear she heard amusement in its tone.
How delightfully naive.
Tell me, Captain Chen, why did your species venture into the dark between stars? To explore, to discover, to find our place in the galaxy, Chen answered honestly.
And what did you bring to defend yourselves on this journey of discovery?
Chen hesitated. Honesty had always been her policy, but admitting to a potentially hostile alien species that their exploration vessel was armed seemed unwise. We brought what we needed to ensure our mission's success, she replied diplomatically.
Weapons, Warsinger Theshkar said with what was definitely amusement now. You brought weapons to a peaceful exploration mission. How wonderfully practical. On the tactical display, Vasquez noted that the alien formations were shifting, moving into patterns that could only be described as combat-ready.
But they weren't targeting the human ship, they were facing outward, as if protecting it from external threats.
Warsinger Theshkar, Chen said carefully, may I ask why you've gathered so many of your vessels here?
Because, the alien replied, we have been waiting 3,000 of your years for someone interesting to arrive. The galaxy has grown stagnant, filled with species that speak of peace while fearing conflict, that seek safety over glory, that choose survival over excellence.
And, you believe we're different? Chen asked.
I know you are different, Theshkar replied.
We have been monitoring your expansion, studying your methods, observing your behavior.
You are the first species we have encountered that approaches the unknown with weapons prepared but hope undimmed. Torres was frantically analyzing the incoming data streams, his eyes widening as he processed the implications. Captain, he whispered, they've been watching us since we left our solar system. They have complete records of our expansion, detailed analyses of our technology, even recordings of our internal communications.
Why?
Chen asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Because, Warsinger Theshkar said, we have been imprisoned in this nebula for 3 millennia by species that fear what we represent.
They call us destroyers, monsters, threats to galactic stability.
But, you are different. You understand that conflict is not evil but natural, that struggle creates strength, that the willingness to fight is what separates the truly alive from the merely existing.
The implications of what they were hearing began to sink in.
The aliens weren't just isolated, they were quarantined.
And, from their perspective, humanity represented potential allies in whatever conflict had led to their imprisonment. What do you want from us? Chen asked directly. Alliance, Theshkar replied without hesitation. Partnership. The chance to show these galaxy-spanning cowards what real civilization looks like when it's built by warriors rather than bureaucrats.
Chen felt the weight of the moment pressing down on her. Whatever she decided in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of her ship and crew, but potentially the future of human expansion into the galaxy. I'll need to discuss this with my government, she said carefully.
Of course, Theshkar agreed. But, while you consider our proposal, perhaps you would be interested in seeing what the galaxy has been hiding from you?
Before Chen could respond, her tactical display lit up with new contacts, hundreds of ships emerging from hyperspace around the nebula's edge. Ships bearing the insignia of species they had never seen before, ships that were moving into combat formations and powering weapons systems.
Captain, Vasquez reported grimly, we have company. And they don't look friendly. The Galactic Council, War Singer Theshkar said, his voice now carrying notes of anticipation that sounded almost musical.
They have come to prevent our alliance.
How thoughtful of them to bring so many targets.
Chen realized with growing horror that she had just walked into the middle of a conflict that was about to reshape the galaxy. And, whether she liked it or not, humanity was about to choose sides in a war they didn't understand against enemies they had never met. The only question was whether they would choose the side of order or chaos, peace or conflict, safety or glory. Looking at her crew, seeing the mixture of fear and excitement in their eyes, Chen suspected she already knew which side felt more human. Admiral Korthak watched his fleet deploy around the Maelstrom Nebula with the grim satisfaction of someone who had finally accepted the inevitable. 300 ships from 17 different species, representing the largest military force the Galactic Council had assembled in over a millennium. It should have been enough to contain any threat. It wasn't.
Admiral, reported his Nexari tactical coordinator, its form flickering between dimensions as it processed multiple probability streams. The human vessel shows no signs of retreat despite our overwhelming numerical advantage.
Of course it doesn't, Korthak muttered, his scaled hands gripping his command chair.
Humans don't retreat from overwhelming odds, they see them as exciting challenges.
On the main display, the single human ship sat motionless at the edge of the Void Singer formations, dwarfed by vessels that could crack planets. But, instead of powering weapons or attempting to flee, the human ship was broadcasting what appeared to be mathematical equations and star charts.
They're sharing navigation data, reported the Vorthak harmonic analyst, its crystalline form resonating with confused frequencies.
The humans are providing the Void Singers with detailed maps of local hyperspace lanes.
Why would they do that? Demanded Overlord Thrax from his flagship.
They can't possibly believe they'll survive an alliance with the Void Singers.
Because, the Keeper's voice echoed across the command frequencies, they don't see survival as the primary objective. They see victory as the primary objective. And, sometimes victory requires terrible allies.
Korthak accessed the archived records on human military philosophy, documents that made his blood run cold every time he read them.
They have a saying, the enemy of my enemy is my friend.
They're willing to ally with monsters if it serves their strategic goals.
But, the Void Singers are beyond monstrous, protested High Researcher Veltan from the science vessel that formed part of their formation. They're manifestations of pure aggression, beings that exist only to consume and destroy.
Perfect partners for a species that views warfare as an art form, Korthak replied grimly. Aboard the indomitable Spirit, Captain Chen was discovering just how accurate that assessment was. Warsinger Theshkar had invited a small human delegation aboard the Void Singer flagship, and what they found there challenged every assumption about alien civilization. The corridors of the massive vessel were works of art, but art that celebrated conflict in all its forms. The walls were covered with murals depicting battles across cosmic time, wars that had reshaped star systems and conflicts that had redefined the meaning of victory. But, more disturbing was how beautiful it all was. The violence wasn't portrayed as necessary evil but as the highest expression of living consciousness. Your species has an interesting perspective on warfare, Chen observed as Theshkar led them through halls that could have housed cathedrals. Warfare is existence distilled to its purest essence, the Void Singer replied, his massive form moving with surprising grace through spaces designed for beings much larger than humans. Everything else, art, philosophy, love, creation, these are simply extensions of the fundamental drive to overcome opposition. Chen found herself nodding in understanding, despite the logical part of her mind screaming warnings. There was something seductive about the Void Singer philosophy, something that resonated with humanity's own complex relationship with conflict. The Council species don't understand this, Theshkar continued, gesturing toward displays that showed the massed fleets surrounding the nebula. They see war as failure, conflict as aberration, violence as proof of primitiveness.
But, what is life without struggle? What is achievement without opposition? What is victory without the possibility of defeat?
They believe in peace through strength, Chen said, though she was beginning to understand why that philosophy might seem contradictory to beings like the Void Singers. They believe in peace through weakness, Veshkar corrected. They maintain order by ensuring that no one is strong enough to challenge that order. Look at their fleet, hundreds of ships, but no two designed by the same species, no unified command structure, no shared tactical doctrine. They're not an alliance, they're a committee with weapons. Through the massive viewports, Chen could see the Council fleet positioning itself for what appeared to be a siege. The ships moved in careful formations, maintaining safe distances from each other and from the nebula itself.
It was textbook defensive positioning, designed to contain rather than conquer.
What do they hope to accomplish? Asked Commander Torres, who had accompanied Chen on the diplomatic mission while Vasquez remained on the ship to coordinate with their own fleet elements. They hope to frighten us back into our prison, Veshkar replied. They believe that a show of overwhelming force will convince us to abandon any thoughts of alliance with your species. And, will it?
Chen asked.
Veshkar's laughter was like the sound of distant thunder, rich and powerful and somehow musical. Captain, we have been imprisoned for 3,000 years.
Do you think we would waste this opportunity because they brought more ships than we have? How many ships do you have? Torres asked, though he suspected he didn't want to know the answer.
Ships?
Veshkar seemed puzzled by the question. We don't have ships, Commander Torres.
We are ships.
The implication took a moment to sink in.
Chen looked around the massive corridor with new understanding.
This entire structure, it's not just a ship. It's a being.
As are the others, Veshkar confirmed.
Void Singers don't build vessels, we become them.
Each of my companions out there is a living warship, capable of independent thought and action.
Your council friends aren't facing a fleet, they're facing a pod of cosmic predators. How many? Chen asked. Currently active?
47. But there are others sleeping in the deeper reaches of the nebula, waiting for reasons to wake.
Today provides such reasons.
As if summoned by his words, the nebula itself began to change. New energy signatures appeared on sensors, massive forms stirring in the cosmic depths like ancient leviathans responding to the call of battle.
Aboard Admiral Korthak's flagship, the sensor readings were causing near panic among the science staff.
Sir, we're detecting new contacts within the nebula, reported the Nexari tactical coordinator.
Large ones. Very large ones. How large? Korthak demanded. Dreadnought class and above.
Sir, some of these readings suggest vessels larger than anything in our databases. Korthak accessed his tactical displays, watching as red icons appeared throughout the nebula's interior. Each new contact represented firepower capable of challenging his entire fleet, and they kept appearing.
Total enemy count, he asked, though he dreaded the answer. Uncertain, sir. At least 60 confirmed contacts, possibly more masked by the nebula's interference.
And, Admiral, they're all moving. The tactical display showed the Void Singer forces organizing with a fluidity that spoke of perfect coordination. Unlike the Council fleet's rigid formations, the alien vessels moved like a school of fish or a flock of birds, individual entities that somehow formed a greater whole. Admiral, his communications officer reported, were receiving a transmission from the human vessel. Put it through, Korthak ordered, hoping against hope that reason might prevail. Captain Chen's image appeared on his screen, and Korthak was struck by how young she looked to be commanding such a momentous decision.
Admiral Korthak of the Galactic Council, Chen said formally, I am Captain Sarah Chen of the United Earthship Indomitable Spirit. I'm transmitting to inform you that humanity has decided to accept the alliance offered by the Void Singers. Captain Chen, Korthak replied, you don't understand what you're allying with.
The Void Singers are beings who have been imprisoned for 3 millennia because they refused to conform to galactic standards of acceptable behavior, Chen interrupted. Beings who represent the principle that strength should not be constrained by the fear of the weak.
They're monsters. Overlord Thrax broke into the communication. They've destroyed entire civilizations.
So have we, Chen replied calmly.
The difference is that we're honest about it.
We don't pretend that peace is possible while building fleets designed for war.
We don't claim to value harmony while practicing segregation and imprisonment.
You don't know what you're unleashing, High Researcher Veltan added her voice to the discussion. The galaxy has been peaceful for millennia because of the sacrifices we've made to maintain that peace. Peace built on the suppression of anyone who might threaten it isn't peace, Shen replied. It's tyranny with better public relations. Korthak felt the last of his hopes crumble. The humans weren't being deceived or coerced, they genuinely believed in what they were doing. They saw the Council's millennia of careful diplomatic balance not as wisdom but as weakness, not as strength but as fear. If you proceed with this alliance, he said formally, the Council will have no choice but to consider humanity a hostile force. Understood, Shen replied. But, Admiral, consider this, you came here with 300 ships to prevent an alliance. What do you think we'll do when you inevitably come after our homeworld with 3,000? The transmission ended, leaving Korthak staring at a blank screen while the implications of Chen's words sank in. The humans weren't just accepting the Void Singers as allies, they were already thinking 3 moves ahead in a conflict that had barely begun. Sir, his tactical coordinator reported, the enemy formations are moving. All Void Singer vessels are advancing to engagement range. And the human ship? Taking position at the center of their formation, sir. It appears they're being treated as an honored guest rather than a subordinate ally. Korthak realized that his worst fears were coming true. The Void Singers hadn't just found allies, they had found kindred spirits. And, together, these 2 warrior species were about to remind the galaxy why some conflicts couldn't be resolved through committees and diplomatic protocols. Signal the fleet, he ordered. All vessels to combat readiness. If we can't prevent this alliance, we'll have to destroy it before it grows stronger. But, even as he gave the order, Korthak knew it was already too late. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when unstoppable force met immovable object and discovered they were on the same side. In the depths of the nebula, Warsinger Theshkar felt the approaching conflict like a song building to crescendo. For the first time in 3,000 years, he would fight beside beings who understood that warfare was not the failure of civilization but its highest expression. Captain Shen, he said to his human guest, are your people ready for what comes next? Shen looked out at the Council fleet, then back at the Void Singer formations, calculating odds and possibilities with the kind of tactical mind that had made humanity masters of their own violent world. We've been ready our entire evolutionary history, she replied. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for us. As the 2 fleets closed toward engagement range, that question was about to be answered in the most direct way possible. The Battle of Maelstrom Nebula lasted 14 hours and changed the galaxy forever. It began when Admiral Korthak, faced with the impossible choice between retreat and engagement, chose what he believed was the lesser of 2 evils. 300 Council ships opened fire simultaneously, their combined firepower enough to sterilize planets and crack moons. None of it mattered. The Void Singers didn't just evade the barrage, they danced through it. Massive living ships that should have been too large to maneuver twisted through space with impossible grace, their movements coordinated by a collective consciousness that processed tactical information at the speed of thought. What should have been a devastating opening strike became a light show that merely announced the beginning of something terrible. But, it was humanity's response that truly horrified the Council forces. Captain Chen watched the incoming fire with the calm focus of someone who had grown up on a world where everything tried to kill you. Evasive maneuvers, she ordered. Pattern Sierra 7. Sierra 7? Commander Vasquez questioned. Captain, that's a combat pattern designed for fighting multiple capital ships simultaneously. Exactly, Chen replied. Torres, are you recording everything? Every sensor sweep, every tactical decision, every energy signature, Torres confirmed. This is the galaxy's first lesson in human military doctrine. The indomitable spirit moved through the enemy fire with a precision that bordered on precognition. Unlike the flowing dance of the Void Singers, the human ship's movements were calculated, efficient, and absolutely ruthless. Where the aliens avoided destruction through artistry, humans avoided it through mathematics and the kind of spatial awareness that came from evolving in 3-dimensional environments where predators attacked from every direction. Impressive, Warsinger Theshkar observed as he watched the human vessel. Your people fight with their minds as much as their weapons. Fighting is problem-solving under pressure, Chen replied. And humans are very good at solving problems.
Aboard Admiral Korthak's flagship, the tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly.
The Void Singers had broken through his forward screens with contemptuous ease, but it was the human ship that terrified him. The small vessel was systematically dismantling his formations with surgical precision, targeting command vessels and communication nodes with an understanding of fleet tactics that shouldn't have been possible for a supposedly peaceful exploration mission. "How do they know our weak points?" demanded Overlord Thrax as another of his heavy cruisers went dark, its command systems fried by precisely targeted electromagnetic pulses. "Because," High Researcher Veltan said as her probability engines processed the tactical data, "they've been studying us since first contact. Every communication, every positioning, every standard operating procedure, they've cataloged all of it."
"That's impossible. We've never made formal contact."
"We've been broadcasting our presence across the galaxy for millennia," the researcher replied grimly.
"Radio signals, hyperspace wake signatures, gravitational disturbances from our fleets.
To a species that treats information gathering as a military necessity, we've been handing them intelligence reports." Korthak realized with growing horror that they weren't just fighting a superior enemy, they were fighting an enemy that knew them better than they knew themselves. Every tactical doctrine, every fleet formation, every technological capability had been analyzed and catalogued by minds that viewed war as both science and art. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving tactical data from the human vessel. They're sharing targeting information with the Void Singers." On the display, the impossible became routine.
Human sensors identified Council weak points while Void Singer weapons exploited them with terrifying efficiency.
The alliance wasn't just functional, it was synergistic, each species complementing the other's capabilities in ways that multiplied their effectiveness. "They're teaching each other," Korthak whispered.
"In the middle of battle, they're sharing knowledge." It was true.
Captain Chen found herself learning as much as she was fighting, watching Warsinger Theshkar demonstrate tactical principles that human military theorists had never imagined. The Void Singers didn't just fight battles, they composed them, turning warfare into a form of aggressive poetry where each maneuver built upon the last to create devastatingly beautiful patterns of destruction. "Your species has interesting ideas about combined arms tactics," Theshkar observed as they watched human fighters coordinate with Void Singer heavy weapons to eliminate a council battle group. "We had not considered using small craft as targeting designators for capital ship weapons." "Your people have interesting ideas about battlefield psychology," Chen replied, noting how the Void Singer attacks were designed not just to destroy but to demoralize.
"We hadn't considered that the aesthetic aspects of warfare could be weaponized."
Together, they were writing new chapters in the art of war, concepts that would terrify military strategists across the galaxy for generations to come. The Council fleet, designed to fight conventional enemies using conventional tactics, found itself facing something unprecedented: an enemy that treated innovation as standard operating procedure. "Admiral," the Nexary tactical coordinator reported, its form flickering rapidly between dimensions as it processed multiple probability cascades. "All primary objectives have been compromised.
Enemy forces have achieved tactical dominance across the entire engagement zone."
Korthak looked at his tactical displays and saw 3,000 years of galactic military doctrine dissolving under the combined assault of human precision and Void Singer artistry.
His fleet wasn't just losing, it was being educated in its own obsolescence. "Signal general retreat," he ordered.
"All vessels to fall back to rally point 7.
"Admiral," Overlord Thrax protested, "we can't retreat. If this alliance is allowed to solidify."
"If this alliance is allowed to solidify, retreat won't help us," Korthak replied.
"But if we stay here, there won't be anyone left to warn the Council what we're facing."
The withdrawal was a masterclass in controlled chaos. Council ships disengaged in carefully coordinated waves, their retreat covered by long-range fire and electronic countermeasures.
It should have been a textbook example of strategic redeployment.
But they weren't fighting enemies who followed textbooks. "Fascinating," Captain Chen observed as she watched the Council fleet's withdrawal patterns.
"They're retreating according to standard doctrine, which means we know exactly where they're going," Warsinger Theshkar finished. "Shall we demonstrate why predictability is a fatal weakness?" What followed was less a pursuit than a lesson in applied tactical theory.
Human ships, designed for speed and maneuverability, harassed the Council retreat while Void Singer vessels used their gravitational manipulation to create hyperspace interdiction fields. Council ships found themselves trapped between human precision and Void Singer power, caught in a closing net that demonstrated the terrifying effectiveness of their new alliance. "This is Admiral Korthak to all Council forces," came the transmission across all frequencies.
"I am ordering complete disengagement. All vessels are to return to their home territories immediately."
"Admiral," his communications officer asked.
"What about the quarantine protocols? What about containing the Void Singers?"
Korthak looked at his tactical displays, showing the scattered remnants of the galaxy's most powerful fleet being systematically dismantled by less than 50 enemy vessels. "The quarantine is over," he said simply.
"And, I suspect containment is no longer possible."
As the last Council ships fled into hyperspace, Captain Chen stood on the bridge of the Indomitable Spirit and contemplated what they had just accomplished. In 14 hours, humanity had announced its presence to the galaxy, formed an alliance that would reshape the balance of power, and demonstrated that 3 millennia of galactic military doctrine were insufficient against opponents who refused to follow the rules. "Captain," Torres reported, "I'm detecting massive hyperspace signatures throughout the nebula.
More Void Singers are awakening."
Through the viewports, they could see new lights kindling in the cosmic darkness as ancient beings stirred to life, drawn by the songs of battle and the promise of worthy opponents.
"How many?" Chen asked.
"Initial estimates suggest over 200 additional contacts, Captain."
"And they're all heading for the hyperspace exit points."
Chen felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension.
Humanity had just allied itself with a force that could challenge the entire galactic order.
The question now was whether they could guide that force toward constructive rather than purely destructive ends.
"Warsinger Theshkar," she said, "what are your people's intentions now that the quarantine is broken?"
"We intend to explore this galaxy that has changed so much in our absence," he replied. "We intend to meet the species that thought they could imprison us. And we intend to discover what other interesting challenges await among the stars."
"And if the Council tries to stop you?"
Theshkar's laughter was like the sound of stellar wine through cosmic debris. "Captain Chen, they just tried to stop us with the largest fleet they could assemble."
"Do you think they'll have better luck with diplomacy?"
Chen realized that the galaxy was about to enter an era of unprecedented change. The careful balance of power that had maintained peace for millennia was crumbling, replaced by something more dynamic, more dangerous, and ultimately more alive.
"What about Earth?" she asked.
"The Council will surely retaliate against our homeworld."
"Then, we will ensure Earth is protected," Theshkar replied. "The Void Singers do not abandon their allies.
And any force that threatens humanity will discover why we were considered dangerous enough to imprison." 6 months later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council reconvened in a new location, their primary station having been mysteriously evacuated after reports of gravitational anomalies in nearby space.
The agenda was simple: how to coexist with an alliance that had fundamentally altered the galaxy's strategic landscape.
Ambassador Zexhai, her crystalline form now permanently flickering with stress fractures, delivered the intelligence briefing that confirmed their worst fears.
"Human expansion has accelerated exponentially," she reported.
They now occupy 47 star systems, each one fortified with defensive systems that incorporate both human and Void Singer technology. Their population growth rate has tripled as they establish colonies optimized for rapid development.
"What about military capabilities?" asked Admiral Korthak, though his tone suggested he dreaded the answer.
"Unknown, but expanding rapidly.
Our long-range sensors detect massive construction projects throughout human space.
Shipyards, research facilities, and what appear to be training grounds where human and Void Singer forces conduct joint exercises."
"Training for what?" demanded Overlord Thrax. "Unknown," Zexhai replied. "But, given human psychology, we should assume they're training for the next war."
High researcher Veltan's braincase pulsed with frantic calculations. "I've been analyzing their expansion patterns, their technological development, their resource allocation. The mathematical models all point to the same conclusion. Which is," asked Counselor Vexera, though her species' renowned diplomatic optimism had been notably absent since the Battle of Maelstrom Nebula. "They're not planning to fight us," Veltan said quietly.
"They're planning to replace us."
The implications settled over the chamber like a toxic cloud.
An alliance between humanity and the Void Singers didn't just threaten the Council's military dominance, it threatened the very concept of civilization as the galaxy had known it for millennia. There is one option remaining, the Keeper's representative said, its ancient voice heavy with resignation.
We could attempt to negotiate.
Negotiate what? Asked Admiral Korthak.
Surrender terms, the Keeper replied.
Because the alternative is a war we cannot win against enemies who view warfare as entertainment. As the session continued, reports arrived from across the galaxy.
Human exploration vessels, now accompanied by Void Singer escorts, were making contact with previously unknown civilizations. New trade routes were being established, new alliances formed, and new principles of interstellar relations implemented.
The galaxy was changing, whether the Council wanted it to or not.
And, somewhere in the depths of space, Captain Sarachan stood on the bridge of humanity's first purpose-built dreadnought, watching construction crews finish installing weapons systems that combined human engineering with Void Singer artistry. Around her, a fleet was taking shape that would ensure humanity's place among the stars, not as supplicants begging for acceptance, but as equals demanding respect. Captain, her new tactical officer reported, were receiving transmission from Earth Command.
The Council has requested formal diplomatic contact.
Shin smiled, remembering her first glimpse of the galaxy's true nature in the Maelstrom Nebula.
Tell Earth Command we'll be happy to receive their delegation.
But, make sure they understand, we're not negotiating for permission to exist. We're negotiating the terms under which we'll allow them to continue existing. As the message was transmitted across the hyperspace networks, the galaxy began to understand what humanity had been trying to tell them all along: the age of committees and careful diplomacy was ending.
The age of humanity had begun.
And, for the first time in 3,000 years, the galaxy learned to fear the dark between stars, because something was looking back from those depths with eyes that saw warfare as art and conquest as destiny.
The Council had been right to keep Earth out of the war.
They should have tried harder.